Good afternoon, folks. We'll start in just about 1 minute. Let some other people hop in on the call, but we're happy to have you, and we'll begin in just a moment. I think we're ready to begin. Maria, do you want to kick us off, and then I'll take over?
Thanks, Theo. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here for Dr. LaTanya Autry's talk. As you may know, this is part of a series of talks and a working group titled Black Study Within and Beyond Crisis. So I want to give you a little introduction to that series before we introduced our distinguished speaker for today. Black studies emerged within the university as a product of an institutional crisis with the ongoing condition of unfreedom for Black students, community, and life in 1969. As an interdisciplinary field of study, it has been subject to much evolution over the past half century. New ruptures in the field require a reevaluation of the role of the university, the academic, and the socio-political terrain that Black studies must navigate. Against the backdrop of a pandemic, the uprisings of summer 2020, and renewed institutional calls for anti-racist reforms, what is the function of critical knowledge production toward the liberation of Black people? How can Black studies meaningfully meet the imperatives of education and communities under crisis? Why is it important to think of Black studies, life, and culture beyond crisis? This critical speaker series and working group in Black studies takes a broad interdisciplinary look at the challenges confronting the work of the humanities under multiple crises. Scholars and artists will introduce the UL community to recent scholarship in the field through their writings and virtual engagement. The working group has made space for students, staff, and faculty to read and discuss recommended selections by the speakers prior to their presentations. The purpose of this space is not to contribute to the spectacular and profitable representation of Black life as crisis, but rather to understand how critical tools of analysis, distinct to Black study and critical thought, can create new avenues of rupture to rupture the enduring relation of slavery's afterlife to the modern world. And we'll hear next from Theo to introduce our distinguished speaker. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Maria. My name is Dr. Theodore Foster. I'm an assistant professor of African American history in the Department of History, Geography, and Philosophy. Really excited to have LaTanya Autry with us today. To begin, I want to briefly read land acknowledgement drafted by my colleague, Dr. Marissa Petro, and First Nations groups in Louisiana. Dr. Petro is the director of the Gilboa Center for Public History. UL Lafayette is on the land of the Atakapa Ishak, and we honor the Atakapa Ishak and the land with gratitude. We would also like to express our gratitude to elders, past, present, and future, of the dozens of other First Nations in the Louisiana area, including the Chitimacha, Appaloosa, Avigel, Tunica Biloxi, Jena Choctaw, Mississippi Band of Choctaw Indians, and Coushatta. We also honor the peoples of African descent who were enslaved on this land when it was part of the Mouton family's sugar plantation. The center's full land acknowledgement can be found at www.gilboacenter.com/honor-native-land. LaTanya Autry is a cultural organizer and co-producer of Museums Are Not Neutral, and founder of the Black Liberation Center. As a cultural organizer in the visual arts, LaTanya S. Autry centers collective care in her liberatory curatorial praxis. In addition to co-creating The Art of Black Dissent, an interactive program that both promotes public discussion about the Black liberation struggle and engenders fighting anti-Blackness through the collective imagining of public art interventions, she co-produced #MuseumsAreNotNeutral, a global initiative that exposes the fallacies of the neutrality claim and calls for an equity-based transformation of museums in the Social Justice and Museums Resource List, a crowdsourced bibliography. Her latest project, the Black Liberation Center, an experimental series of exhibitions, workshops, and programming, spotlights arts and culture that envision and strategize paths toward the freedom of all Black people and thus all people. LaTanya has curated exhibits and organized programs at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Cleveland, Yale University Art Gallery, Artspace New Haven, and other institutions. Through her graduate studies at University of Delaware, where she is completing her PhD in art history, LaTanya has developed expertise in the art of the United States, photography, and museums. Her dissertation, The Crossroads of Commemoration, Lynching Landscapes in America, which analyzes how individuals and communities memorialize lynching violence in the built environment, concentrates on the interplay of race, representation, memory, and public space. Now, I must share a brief anecdote first of meeting LaTanya in 2017 at a conference at the Mississippi Museum of Art, celebrating the bicentennial of statehood. Mississippi was admitted to the Union in 1817. And I was trying to complete my dissertation and looking for any kind of artistic, institutional museum representation of civil rights, memory, and history. And indeed, this conference convening engaged a lot of different artists. I was introduced to Torkwase Dyson for the first time in her Black compositional thought. And LaTanya Autry helped introduce me to Nona Fausting, excellent photographer and Black performance artist who LaTanya has also co-curated an exhibition with titled Making Them Known. Now, it was at that conference that we first discussed Christina Sharpe's work, In the Wake, right, which had just come out in 2016. Her book is titled In the Wake on Blackness and Being, a really important text for a lot of the work in Black studies right now that LaTanya really embodies as a practice, right? And, in this moment, on this Wednesday, April 14th, it's a really heavy time for Black folks who are in mourning across the country, indeed world, after witnessing another spectacular murder, in this case, Dante Wright in Minnesota, and the ongoing kind of spectacle of the trial for Derek Chauvin of the murder of George Floyd. So I find it important to return to Christina Sharpe and her words. Again, LaTanya curated an excellent exhibit that's on through June 6th at the Museum of Contemporary Art titled Imagine Otherwise. And it leads with a quote from Christina Sharpe in her book that reads, "What happens when we proceed as if we know this, anti-Blackness, to be the ground on which we stand, the ground from which we to attempt to speak, for instance, an I or a we who know, an I or a we who care." So when I was reading that, it brought me back to a moment where there was a controversy over this painting by Dana Schutz over Emmett Till, but Christina Sharpe really built upon her wake work concept that I want to return us to briefly before turning the floor over to you. And she says, so this is a question of intimacy, right? Images of Black suffering. What is the relation to the Black brutalized body? The painter assumes an intimate relation to it. The viewer is put in intimate relation to it. Are those the same intimate relations? In my book, I talk about wake work. The wake is keeping track of the ship, keeping watch for the dead. It was a way for me to think about the persistence of Black death, what Saidiya Hartman calls the afterlife of slavery, and the persistence of Black life, the ways in which Black people nonetheless make spaces of joy. Wake work is the work that we Black people do in the face of our ongoing death, and the ways in which we insist life into the present. I think it's really powerful that those Black young people put their bodies in front of that painting. For me, that is awake. Those young people are keeping watch with the dead, practicing a kind of care. Indeed, LaTanya was practicing a kind of care last December when she went to great lengths to the Black Liberation Center to put together this series of talks titled Art of Collective Care and Responsibility, Handling Images of Black Suffering and Death. I encourage you all to check out that work and those recordings that I think are available through her website. They're really powerful and timely conversations with a lot of really important artists, activists, scholars about the work of engaging in these kinds of conversations with a kind of integrity and commitment to, end ongoing Black death and not simply describe again and again and again these images and these moments that repeat. Rather, how can we rupture that relation is really the work of this group, and I know in many ways the work of LaTanya. So with that extra long introduction, LaTanya, please, you have the next 30, 40 minutes, and then we'll have some Q&A afterwards.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much, Dr. Foster, for that, wonderful introduction, really both of you for this welcome today. And yeah, these times, they're hard. They're really, really hard. I don't even know, I don't know how I'm going to be each day, how I'm going to feel, because sometimes I do just stop. And today and yesterday, I was just kind of revved up, but I was in this zone. And I was sharing to people that all I've got for everybody are revolution notes. That's all I've got, because that's all I can think of where we need to be. There is this important work of care, and I'm really glad that you actually, brought up Professor Sharpe's work, and I'm going to be talking about that quite a bit today. I've been trying to think about my curatorial work, working with that particular book, and which I'll discuss. I'm zooming in today from the ancestral and unceded lands of the Erie and the Haudenosaunee people. I'm a descendant of enslaved people living on these lands. I came to Ohio about 2 years ago for what was at that time a fellowship that I restructured and made it into a residency. I'll be talking about that a little bit. Had no knowledge of really Cleveland or Ohio. I was born in Michigan, Detroit, Michigan, and grew up moving across the country. And because my father was military, but we would kind of pass through Ohio and didn't really do anything here. But I don't know, Michigan, Ohio has some kind of weird rivalry, and I think it has to do with sports, some silliness like that. And back in 2014, Cleveland was definitely on my mind, actually quite a bit. 2014, for me, kind of stands out. I mean, these killings that we keep having, they keep killing Black people all the time, because that's what happens in this nation state. But in 2014, it seemed like they kind of went to this certain zone of the spectacular in terms of social media, of seeing multiple Black deaths, where you could watch them in real time, on your phone, on your computer at your desk, whatever. You could just see people be dying and being murdered. And that summer of 2014, I actually saw Eric Gardner being choked to death. I remember I was living in Brooklyn, New York at the time, and he was murdered in Staten Island. I was living like in an area that was kind of close, where I was like, wow, that's happening right now over here. And then I think it was later, it was Michael Brown. I saw a picture, and I just, was scrolling through Twitter and just kind of came across these things. And I thought, what the actual is going on? Like they keep doing it. And it is important in some ways to have these visual records, and we'll talk more about that. But at the same time, it's really, it's really traumatizing to keep seeing these. And because, the reality is nothing is happening. Nothing is happening to the people who keep murdering us. In 2014, it was in November that Tamir Rice, a 12-year-old boy, was murdered here in Cleveland, Ohio. And like I said, I wasn't here then. I was actually living in Connecticut at that time. I think I was in Connecticut at that time, but I've heard about this killing. So this was just a kid he was just shot down. The cops showed up and just started shooting. Just a 12-year-old boy. And that was kind of my reference for Cleveland, to tell you the truth. Cleveland is one city out of like all of these cities in the United States that keeps murdering Black people. Cleveland, though, after I moved here, I learned a lot of things about this city, and I'm still learning. It has a very high poverty rate in Cleveland. It's got extreme disenfranchisement. The schools are basically horrific. Healthcare, in some ways, has got the highest amount of healthcare, and like these amazing cancer centers. I actually live really close to a medical center. And yet for Black people, has the highest rate for Black maternal death and the highest rate for Black infant mortality. So the kind of basically genocide of Black people, and Cleveland is really at the forefront for that. I didn't know that about Cleveland until I got here. after I was here for a while, I ended up meeting Miss Samaria Rice. She is the mother of Tamir Rice, and she, like many of these mothers, has become an activist where she has fought for justice for her son, justice that's perpetually been denied. She participated in the teach-in event that Dr. Foster mentioned in the introduction here, and we'll talk about that a little bit. I did want to share some of her words though, and I just feel like I've continued to kind of reflect on what she said at this event. I invited her to speak, as well as Professor Christina Sharpe. So Christina Sharpe was our keynote speaker, and then the remarks were from Miss Samaria Rice. And this is just a snippet of what she said. The death of my son has changed my life. It woke me up in the most horrific way. America had sold me a lie. I truly believed I was an American citizen and that I was going to get justice for the assassination of my son. I did not want to allow America to tell lies to our Black and Brown children. So that's why I created the Tamir Rice Afrocultural Center. So she shared those words. That was in early December when we had this event. And it was only 1 week after she got the official notice from the US Justice Department that they were closing the investigation on the officer who murdered her son. She has been in, like, you know, this ongoing state of depression and just this, you know, real heartbreak. And that's all of these families, really, all of them. You know, Daunte Wright's family, George Floyd, like all of these families are going through that. I decided to work with Miss Rice, or wanted to work with her. Was kind of afraid on how to do it because the museum I work at kind of got involved in this whole thing where they just were going to take on a show of images of by artist Sean Leonardo, where he drew pictures of Black men and Tamir Rice, a boy, being murdered by police. And the museum is a white museum, Oka Cleveland, where I was working, and I just use that word white museum just to be very frank about what it is. It's a white-led, white-centered institution for over 50 years. No Black people ever been in their curatorial department. So anyway, they didn't really even put that, like when they were considering the show, they didn't even put it through an actual curatorial process of thinking about what the work is about, what it means, all of that. Like that's kind of the job of a curator to do for any type of show. And I would think especially for a show with contemporary subjects, named contemporary subjects that have been murdered within the last 5 years or so. And I was really just like very unhappy with what I saw there, the lack of care. I've had to develop my own kind of thinking about what I'm doing as a curator. So I was there under a curatorial fellowship, and I have been trained pretty much in my background is like studying art history, working on this third degree in art history, which is a very white field. And I've worked in very, in like gone to school in white schools, and then been trained in white museum spaces. And as a Black woman, that has been very violent experience for years and years. I have been the only Black person in curatorial meetings, all kinds of meetings for years by myself, only person of color. In majority Black cities like Cleveland, Ohio, it's majority Black, but there are no Black people really in positions of power in these institutions. I do want to show you some images. So I think I have share screen possibilities, right? Great. Let me see. Okay, it's saying I don't.
Try now, I think you should.
Okay, great. Okay, so exceeding the limits is what I want to show you. When I started out with this kind of, let's see, here we go, curatorial work, I'm an art historian, but I have to say I also really study like processes and practices. So a lot of my focus in museums has been to study race, and not just studying, a lot of people kind of interpret that as meaning, oh, you do African-American art. And I'm like, I do have an interest in African-American art, But I'm really doing is I'm taking kind of a critical race theory approach, and I'm studying representations. So, you know, it can be art objects and images, but it's also how racism operates through institutions that really interests me. And I have found that I didn't feel like many people were taking that kind of approach to museums. I mainly focused on art museums, a little bit in history museums, but basically art museums. And so that's what I'm doing. I thought I would go in and I would work as a curatorial fellow, and I would be kind of almost like undercover and learning about how racism operates in these white institutions, as well as I would learn some, you know, skills as a curator. So through this process, the people that have that I've already kind of kept in mind all of the time have been people like Ida B. Wells Barnett. Years ago, people kept calling me, what were they calling me, the lynching lady? Because that's like what my dissertation studies, and I would always talk about lynching. And it really bothered me at first. I was like, lynching lady. And it was Professor Courtney Baker who said, you know, you should be proud of that. That's like Ida B. Wells. Like, you want to be in the Ida B. Wells Barnett category. That's the lynching lady, you know. And then I thought about, I was like, okay, you know, when she said that, it made me think about it in a really different way. And yeah, I'm very proud to follow the footsteps of some trailblazer, you know, human rights activist like Ida B. Wells Barnett. And over on the right is a button I had made. So I actually wear that on my jacket sometimes, this picture of her. I keep her with me. Another person I think a lot with, I think with like activists, and I kind of would listen to these histories, and these are the people I'm thinking about trying to take those ideas and apply them to like a curatorial practice. So I wasn't trained to do this, I figured it out. Because like I said, I'm in art history, it's a very white discipline. It's been very white discipline. And so I had to kind of figure out what made sense for me. I am a Black woman coming from a working class kind of background. Just about none of my training actually seemed like it connected with me. So I kind of found people, and I kind of found Black studies, basically. I didn't start with that. I don't think I took any classes in Black studies, but I've been, you know, picking it up, or maybe like as an undergrad, but as a graduate student, I hadn't. And I realized through the work I wanted to do that I actually needed this whole other toolkit and just orientation, because it's another way to look at things. And that's the part that was missing. It's not just learn Black history. It's that you have to have a certain orientation of like, you know, understanding that anti-Blackness is the ground that we walk on. So one of the people that I also think with a lot, well, one is James Baldwin. I don't have his picture in here, but he's somebody I feel like I just constantly look at his scholarship. But Toni Morrison just is huge. Toni Morrison. So this is before I was even really thinking about using words like, I'm having a liberatory curatorial praxis. I didn't used to talk like that. I mean, I was kind of talking like that, I guess, a little bit, but I didn't know those words. I wouldn't have known what that meant, you know, even like, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, I'd be like, what? But I think I've been figuring out what I'm doing. Toni Morrison's just writing and scholarship, how she would talk, she said things like, you know, I'm looking for a time when Black people are writing for Black people. Stop doing this thing where we are like performing and accommodating whiteness. And that made a lot of sense to me. Also, again, because my training was so much like, you're working in these white spaces, white museum spaces, and they tell us that, you know, we're supposed to be writing the texts that we create or exhibitions that we're creating. We're doing it for just the museum visitors. And I'm always like, who is the museum visitor? Wait, who are you appealing to? Whoever you're appealing to probably isn't exactly who I'm appealing to, especially if I'm like the first time there's a Black person in this space. And when our museum visitors tend to be who I know they're really trying to attract are affluent white people, those aren't the people who necessarily I'm thinking about. I'm definitely not. I mean, they can come to the show, they're welcome to come to it, I hope they get something out of it, but that's not people that I have anything to do with. So thinking with someone like Toni Morrison is really helpful for me as a Black woman from a working class background in these white spaces like Yale Art Gallery. You know, in many ways, that's just like a bizarre kind of place to be in. While doing this work, I also found this Leanne Batas-Masaki Simpson. I found an article that she wrote called Temporary Spaces of Joy and Freedom. And what I really loved about it is that she talks about how she's writing for her community. And that actually resonated with the stuff that Toni Morrison is talking about, like writing for a Black audience, you know, centering these people first, not trying to translate yourself all the time and work through a white voice, through a white lens. So I love Leanne's work. And I love the piece that I came across was over on the left. You see there's a copy of the article. It's really a discussion. She was in dialogue with Dion Brand, and they are talking about Leanne's book, As We Have Always Done, Indigenous Freedom Through Radical Resistance. I love the discussion, so many aspects about it, but also because Leanne is specifically saying, you know, more Indigenous and Black people need to be working together, you know, building co-resistance, fighting white supremacy, fighting ongoing colonialism. So when I saw this discussion, I kind of was just meditating on it for a while, and I thought this would be great to kind of think with for a show. So a lot of my show ideas do come from books and articles, like ideas, theories, and things, and I try to like live them. That's really, I believe in that. Like that's how I'm operating in general. So I reached out to Leanne Batas-Masagi-Simpson, who is also, in addition to being an author, educator, activist, she's also an artist, a performing artist. And I did a show that was, I'm only gonna kind of focus on a couple of the recent shows. So this was at MoCA Cleveland last year. It was only open for a little while because of the pandemic, but we had just opened in like the end of January. And so it's open for like a month and then, you know, it closed. Leanne does really wonderful kind of, well, all kinds of stuff, but she sings and she does some video art, and there's like a video on the wall in the center there on the wall that's called Leaks that she did with another Indigenous artist. This is someone, Cara Mumford. And then there's another video, which you can't see on another wall in there, that she did called Be Dobbin, that's with Amanda Strong. The piece in the far back is the Nap Ministry. It's by Trisha Hersey. She has a project on Instagram called the Nap Ministry and in other spaces, and really fantastic. Oh, I think that's on a timer, unfortunately. And then this piece that you see, this red and white piece, is called Red Carpet by Vaiwana Numatello and Kyle Goen. This piece I really love. It is 30 feet long. It is about basically knowing that our feet, when we are touching the ground, we are on Indigenous soil, and it's encouraging us to really think about what that means. And we activate the carpet with our bodies, about us being together, and they're calling on us to do the work of decolonizing. There was another piece in this space by John Edmonds of a do-rag kind of piece. Really love this show. I thought it had so many possibilities, and it's really very much about people being together, as much as, you know, I have a picture here with no people in the room, but for the little bit of time we were there, we were together and we're in this space, and it was so rich. And part of that was, you know, for me, it wasn't just like create that exhibition and I'm done. It's about creating these relationships. That's the work, I think, of doing the decolonial project and this work of building resistance, is we had to find each other. We had to find our people. So seated there is Leanne Batas-Masagi-Simpson and some of the artists in the show, like this is Trisha Hersey over here. This is Moana, and this is Kyle. They were, you know, here for this day. And then these are people here in Cleveland, other artists and stuff that live in the city, Indigenous and Black folks in Cleveland. And I'm trying to do this through my curatorial project of building coalitions. So it's very important to me. It's hard to do because I've often been working at places where I'm just there, you know, for a short term. A lot of these white museum spaces are doing this. They don't really hire curators of color. And even if they did, you probably don't want to stay there too long because the spaces are really violent. They're very racist. That's just what it is. And so I've been trying to build coalitions, build energy, find people, but like I said, it's difficult what you can do in 2 years. You can do some stuff, but it's hard too. But this is something I was really proud of, that we were together and starting to build. And for me, it's about doing that with the next show as well. So the new show that's up is called Imagine Otherwise. And this one opened just a little while ago in February. And it's also working with a book. So this one is working with Christina Sharpe's book. And this is a quote from the book that I just, like when I came across this, when I finally started reading the book, I I turned to this page and this is like towards the beginning, and I was like, yes. In other words, for Black academics to produce legible work in the academy often means adhering to research methods that are drafted into the service of a larger destructive force, thereby doing violence to our capacities to read, think, and imagine otherwise. When I saw that, I was like, yes, because here's somebody who was really just kind of, just putting it how it is. So much of my education has been people messing around, acting like things aren't the way that they are. And here was somebody just saying it. That's been my education. That's been my experience working as a curatorial fellow in various white spaces. I've been drafted into the service of doing things that are actually just opposed to that I oppose and are opposed to like my community in general. That's what I talk about when I mean about the violence. It is a violent experience to constantly be put into the zone of, here we go again. How much do I push back on this one? How horrible is this? So when I saw those words, about imagine otherwise, I decided to really kind of meditate on that idea. And I love the book because it does put together, it makes you think about like, what could it be to create something where I'm going to exhibit this kind of care, like this passage that Dr. Foster was kind of highlighting earlier, this kind of moment of, what happens when we proceed as if we know this anti-Blackness to be the ground on which we stand. When we think about the I are the we who know, the I are we who care. So I took this passage and thought of artists that I felt like do that work of expressing that knowing and expressing that care, and that the work that Christina Sharpe is talking about, she calls wake work, that careful, very, very careful work of knowing and caring and moving through life, of navigating and not pretending that this violence isn't going on. Because that's what sometimes I think people want us to do. We're not pretending it's not going on. We know it. We honor those of us who are getting hit, those of us who are dying. And then we also find ways to kind of care for ourselves and love one another. That is a really difficult project. So the show is attempting to try to kind of, speak with people who are doing that work in some way. The show was originally meant to only be in one space at MoCA Cleveland. Last year, I was going through all kind of like just racist nightmare stuff with this institution, speaking up against the violence of these places when you're the only Black person, only person of color, and who can create any content at the institution. It is not welcomed. The reason why these places are white spaces, and they've been like this for over half a century in this very Black city, there's a reason why it's like that, right? So these people did not expect me to be speaking up, and I did. And me speaking up meant all kinds of stuff. They tried to cancel my show. I fought back. I did a lot. Ended up getting a show back and was talking to someone, and she, when I was going through this nightmare last summer trying to get my show back, and this person in town said, I hear you, you should be able to have your show, but what really bothers me is, why do we keep giving these places our best work? Why do we do that? And I thought about it, and she's totally right, because I know why I'm doing it. So I'm participating, I'm being complicit in this anti-Blackness, because really, we often don't think about how we're funding these institutions. We keep thinking, oh, well, it's the rich people who are funding these places, right? And these corporations, maybe some grants and stuff like that. It's actually us too. By being in these spaces, I'm funding it. By bringing in these artists, I'm funding it. So I kept thinking about, like, it's very hard to be trying to do a project where you're trying to care for artists. I'm thinking about, like, care is so central to my work as a curator, and not just caring for objects, but caring for communities. But at the same time, I'm working at this place that's doing a lot of violent things. And I was often trying to shield people, jump in front of, yada, yada, yada. Part of the project is that I learned through this experience is nobody was really trying to protect me. So this care thing isn't like, it ain't happening throughout. And that's a problem. That's like a real problem that we have. And yeah, so anyway, thinking very hard about that question of why we keep giving these places our work, and then realizing, yes, how I am being complicit in the anti-Blackness, right, of these spaces. I thought, okay, I still want my space back, mainly because they had this really nice space on the 4th floor where I was supposed to get to do my show. I had a big budget and all this stuff. But I thought about, like, I need to embody that curatorial wake work as well, not just by the artists that I bring in, but how I do the project. And so for me, I decided that meant I would split the show up, and I would then draw funds out of the museum and make them put it into Black spaces in town to kind of, and it's not nearly enough, it's like tiny for real, but I felt like it's an opportunity to show other ways to do curatorial work. Also in the description, I did identify that MoCA has consistent anti-Black practices. They didn't like that. But it's true. You know, like I just said, they didn't hire any Black people in their curatorial department for over 50 years. In mine, they didn't even really hire me for that. I just restructured my fellowship and made it into a residency. And that's how I got that title of curator. But it really wasn't that they hired me as a curator. The stuff that went on there, some of it is exceptionally bad, but a lot of it is kind of typical actually in white museum spaces. So what I did is on the 4th floor, this really nice space, I invited Shikeith. He's an artist based out in Pittsburgh. He has done this really wonderful installation. It's kind of 2 parts. So this is the part called Still Waters Run Deep. And that's actually Shikeith in there taking a photo of it. This is right after the install. This is a fantastic work. And, you know, he really took to heart Christina Sharpe's scholarship and thinking about the wake, right? And thinking about the ship. One of the reasons I also wanted this show to be at MoCA Cleveland, because even the anti-Blackness that I was going through, I was like, it's kind of perfect. When I say it, feels horrible to say that, but it's perfect for this show. It's perfect. Like working with that whole quote about the ground that we walk on. So I was like, you know, it's kind of perfect to do it right here. But if I'm going to do it, I'm going to tell the truth. I'm not going to sit here and act like it's not what it is. And what people expect from somebody like me is that you would, you know, be quiet about that part. And we would just like celebrate this beautiful, wonderful art, which is beautiful and wonderful. But these places are what they are, and that is also part of the entire project. And so to work with Christina Sharpe's scholarship, anybody who has any sense, I think, knows that she is talking about place, and it is very much to, that is part of the work of wake work, is that honesty, that truth. And you don't do it because it's convenient and it's easy or whatever. You do it because it needs to be done. So that was for me part of it, the contribution I was like try to do just to do the project right, but also I think it's helpful for the field is to tell the truth about these places. That's very much a big part of my work as a curator. I think of curating as a form of love, as a love practice, and you do love and you create visions for the future through partly telling the truth about where we've been and what's going on right now. This is another part of the installation, Fall on Your Ways. And again, you know, he's just kind of taken like these certain feelings, taking these organic materials and really explored them in deep ways, thinking about Black queer culture, and this kind of celebration of other ways of existing in the world, despite this violence that Black folks, especially Black queer folks, have been subjected to. There is a celebration of their life. And I think Shikeith was kind of perfect for this project. I mean, of course he was perfect. I thought about him right away from the beginning. But also, so the other sites I kind of brought together were these 2 Black spaces in town. One of them is in this building called the Madison. There is a Black cultural space in here called Third Space Action Lab. This is in the Glenville neighborhood, which is very close to MoCA Cleveland, which is actually really part of Glenville, but it's been gentrified and they gave it a new name now, that area. So over here at Third Space Action Lab, there are 2 installations. One is by Imani Dennison called No Mas, Irreversible Entanglements, really fantastic Afrofuturist film with beautiful kind of just slow gestures, the movement, and yet the music is kind of almost frenetic. It's really, really beautiful film. And it's kind of like Black people just leaving this planet for somewhere else, somewhere better. This is just another still from it. And you could see this video actually online too. It looks great in the space, of course, but you can watch it online if you just Google that, Imani's name, and you know, the link. Well, you can't Google the link, but you know, anyway. And also there is Amber N. Ford is a photographer here in Cleveland, and she has this installation up called Strands, Tracks, and Naps, kind of looking at Black hair. And I really love what Amber came up with. Originally, I kind of asked her for like this piece in the back is an enlargement. This is of hair of passion twist, like a close-up. And originally, she has kind of a series of 5 of these. I was thinking I would have like 24 by 36, just put like 3 of them on this wall with a white wall kind of background. And she was like, that's interesting. I think I'd like to do something else. And I'm glad she did. It's more interesting looking, I think, more engaging, and it's really rich. I think that would have been nice, but this is like doing a whole other thing. She took, she has some monoprints here and some collages that she created. And it's really an interesting kind of dialogue and relationships about Black hair, and kind of makes you go like zoom in and zoom out. And the subjects have this very strong kind of gaze. They're very much in control. And I like this work because I think, again, you know, pushing out of that, let's study Black bodies being destroyed, but it's also this kind of, you know, Black self-determination that's very evident in her work. The 4th artist in the show is Antwoine Washington. He has a museum over on the west side of town. It's called Museum of Creative Human Art. He kind of created this with his business partner, Michael Russell. And I love this place. They are located above a bowling alley. And the people on the bowling alley were just like, you know, you can use the marquee and put the name of the show on there. So they did. And this is one of the works in his installation. And he has like multiple pieces in the show, and his whole installation is called "And Yeah, about that seat at the table." You know, thinking about that proverbial so-called access point for us is like, oh, if you get a seat at the table, you're going to change everything, and it usually is illusory. It doesn't really work out that way. This is one piece out of like 8 in that show. So this one I actually really love in particular, and he's kind of highlighting how often Black folks are kind of fighting with one another to get that money, actually. And it's unfortunate because we do a lot of that. This is another piece in there. He has a mural that's also actually up in a public space. So this photo is of the picture from the public space in Cleveland Public Square, downtown Cleveland. But he also made another reproduction of this that he put up into the museum space. And he's kind of highlighting, you know, folks like Shirley Chisholm and Fannie Lou Hamer, Harriet Tubman, and so forth, like our histories, keeping them present, and thinking about like our futures and about freedom. Antwoine, I didn't know him for so long, but I'm really glad I got to meet him early last year before the pandemic really kind of closed things down. And then I was already following his work, but then I got to know him, and I was just so impressed that he started his own museum. And I think that is a lot of the work that we really need to be doing more, is we need to support more of these Black cultural spaces, and more of us need to make more spaces that imagining otherwise, instead of the constant trying to be incorporated, to be included in white spaces, which are typically extremely violent and not supportive. And they actually do stuff, I think, to drain you on purpose, to like destroy us while we're in there. And they often are like assimilation projects. It's about if you assimilate, if you behave the correct way, and if you do not, you know, it's a very hardcore kind of policing, and they do not care that they destroy people. You can get out, and they'll just try to find a new person to tokenize. So all of that is like, you could get some skills in it, but it's a hyper violent experience. I learned a lot about racism, you know, working in these white spaces. And MoCA Cleveland definitely gave me a lot of material. Some of these other projects that I'm really excited about that I've been doing, they have been outside of these institutions. So those were institutional projects. I've been doing a lot of kind of para-institutional and ones that are just completely on the outside. I started this social justice and museums resource list back in 2015. It is over 50 pages long. It's like all kinds of articles and stuff that are related to social justice kind of issues, all kind of discussions about race, it's about gender things, gender issues. It was an open collaborative document for years. It just started getting really buggy. So I actually shut it down, and now I'm the sole editor of it, which I don't actually like because that's a big job to do. And people write me and say, how come my article isn't on there? It's over 50 pages, people. Send me, if you have content and you like it to be added to this, I would, be happy to add it. You just have to send it to me in citation form and with links, because like I said, I'm one person. I do not get paid for this project. I take on these things as, like I said, as part of my love project for trying to make the world a better place. But yeah, I don't get paid to do this. This other project I started is Museums Are Not Neutral. This started in 2017. I do this with my friend and colleague, Mike Morawski, another person who worked in museums for years. And at the time I had just finished working at Yale Art Gallery, and I was over it, where people at Yale had told me over and over that they couldn't do all kinds of things because the museum is this neutral place. And that, the things I was saying are too political. I was like, that is like ridiculous. Of course, a museum is not a neutral place. It is basically a colonialist product, imperialist, nationalist kind of project. And all the decisions, the fact that I've been alone in these spaces for years, it's the only Black person, only person of color in majority Black cities, is not a neutral experience. Nothing neutral about that. This is all about power dynamics. So anyway, we started this initiative, and the money from these t-shirt sales goes to community organizations. We didn't realize that this would go on and it would really resonate with people, but it has. Actually, people all over the world, not just the United States, but all over the world for years. We've been going strong for nearly 4 years, because it started in August 2017. It started a global discussion. And I love that. To me, that's like the best part, is link people together through this hashtag, Museums Are Not Neutral, and raise just tens of thousands of dollars for community organizations. It's helped more people to feel confident in speaking up. Museum workers, there's a lot of fear. These institutions, they have really got people on leashes. It's ridiculous. I often say Black people are, Black people especially, but really all the workers are on, some of them are on some fancy leashes. Some have diamonds on their leash, their collar, but they're on a collar. These institutions are frightening. So yeah, Museums Are Not Neutral is one of these things. I was thinking before that this was all separate, the advocacy activism work from these curatorial institutional projects, but I have learned that they actually are all a type of curating, and that they all are about, like the way I operate is that it's about caring for communities and connection. So it's all part of my curatorial project. This is a project I really, really love, having done it for a while, the Art of Black Descent. It's a pop-up kind of program exhibition I do with a colleague. And we basically, we started at Yale Art Gallery. That's when they kept telling me they couldn't do the stuff I wanted to do because it was too political. It started because I was, really kind of like, what are we doing as a museum about all these murders that keep happening? And the museum was doing, well, they were doing something. They were ignoring those killings. That's what they were doing. They were choosing to ignore them. They were choosing to ignore all the protests and uprisings that were happening across the country. My friend Gabriella Svenningson and I created this collaboration called the Art of Black Descent. And I don't have the pictures of the Yale one, but we were using objects from their collection. So, we had some really nice pieces that we were showing by Glenn Ligon and oh gosh, like Adrian Piper, folks like that. I'm not a millionaire. So I've continued to do this project and using my own collection. And I'm just very happy that there are some artists out there that, offer prints and things like that somebody like me with a much more humble budget can buy. But it makes a lot of sense with protests kind of work. A lot of times things are in posters and things like that. There's all kinds of stuff you can do. So, we did this one time as a public program at Yale Art Gallery, and then we did it multiple times for classes when at Yale, like 6 times or something. And then Gabriella and I, because that's Gabriella over here, that's me, we started taking it to high schools and like libraries in town as well. We would take off a day, vacation day, because the museum was not supporting us. Yale Art Gallery did not support this project. We took off and on our own time and would do this and bring this to other spaces. And we just love doing it. Working with these young people is also really exciting to hear how the ideas that they get. We would show books, all kinds of material, zines, you know, all kinds of things, posters, and ask questions. It's an inquiry-based kind of project. We ask questions and get them to think about what's going on in the world, think about the images that they're seeing, think about interventions they can do with art around this idea of caring for Black communities. My latest project is Black Liberation Center, and I'm real just excited about this one. It started as this para-institutional project, a way for me to get out of this really messed up museum that I was in. I thought of it as creating my own Maroon Society. I told them I was just gonna work on this. I'm doing this Black Liberation Center project. And what it is a series of exhibitions and programming. And the first project I did was the teach-in that Professor Foster talked about. It's called the art of collective care and responsibility. And that's the event that I invited Ms. Rice and Professor Christina Sharpe to speak in. And we also had like multiple wonderful like artists and activists, other artists and activists that talked. It was like a 5-day kind of event, 3 days of talks and two days of workshops. Really just amazing project. You can go to the website. I hope you do check it out. I also have a project on there that called Still I Rise, where I only did one of those, I think, so far. I had like multiple plans to do more. I'm hoping to get back on all of these. I just have to find funding to keep doing them. Still I Rise was pretty much just interviewing particular Black cultural workers who do important work of care. My first guest was Kelly Morgan, Professor Kelly Morgan. I hope you've read her work. She's a very important curator that's one of the few people who will speak out and tell you the real truth about working in these white institutions, and she's really doing that wake work. And then I had another person, and you know what, I found that some of the problems of doing this is that Black people and Black women especially are tired. So sometimes I would set up these things, these events, and then people would be like, you know, I really want to do this, but I'm exhausted. And as much as I really wanted to do it as well, I had to realize that I had to pull back a little bit and let people rest, that we deserve rest more. So that gives you some kind of tidbits to it, to some of the stuff I've been doing. Yeah, I think I'm gonna stop there.
Wow. Again, I wish this were in person to some extent so that we could, you know, you could hear the round of applause that I know folk are sharing right now. And we're very grateful for that kind of analysis of your own evolution as a kind of, you know, curator, activist, cultural organizer, etc. There's a lot there that I'd love to respond to, but I want to give folks some time to ask some questions of our distinguished speaker. You know, the statement you made about funding, I thought was really helpful and key in terms of really this point about, you know, our relationship to power and how that shifts over time, depending on, you know, where and how you're employed in an institution and how you navigate that space. Fungibility is a term that comes to mind as well, right? Funding and fungibility. So, right, the exchangeability of Black curators, artists, practitioners in these different institutions is so key to a lot of the analysis of Christina Sharpe and Saidiya Hartman, that, you know, it's not just the Black body, but Blackness that's the object of circulation and currency, really, value, right, in the demand for future increase, right, of the slave, but also of the Black, which is why I love so much work in Black studies as an analytic. So we only have about 5 minutes left. I want to honor our commitment to LaTanya in terms of our hour. These have been short and sweet. We did read that excellent piece from Dr. Kelly Morgan for our working group last Friday. It was very, very helpful. And I think your talk brought us more. So please, for those of you who are on the call, if you have any questions, please populate them in the chat so that we can take some time to engage. But I'll be continuing to engage on this talk for a while. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Sorry, I talked so long.
Everything you said was quite precious and important, and I'm sure, you know, questions are you'll continue to get and be in dialogue. I know LaTanya has a very active social media feed don't go asking questions there necessarily, but if you have questions, I'm sure there's some answers that she might drop occasionally. The lynching lady comment to me is crazy. Well, I think we have questions in the question. Okay, cool, Q&A. Carrie, who's an excellent grad student in our department, asks, do you believe that the underrepresentation of African-American professionals in curatorial positions in museums is a legitimate reason reframing historical discourse in a long, arduous journey?
Yeah, I think, I think it's so complicated because one thing is that, yes, in certain museums that I call like just white museums, the ones that are white led, white centered, I just call them white museums because they call all these other things Black museums, Latinx museum, Chinese museum, but we call these other ones mainstream, like this kind of erasure again of whiteness. So I just call them white museums. Black people do work in those places. Actually, a lot of us are in those places, but they're in certain kind of jobs, right? So they are in the front of house kind of jobs, which are important positions, but not the ones that really get to decide the orientation of the institution. So the people who, will work at the visitor services desk, the people cleaning the building, the facility staff, the people guarding the art. So there are a lot of Black folks actually in museums and a lot of folks of color. And that's traditional. And then another area where some of them might be is in the education department, but not even the head of the education department. They hire people on a lot of times as part-time workers with no benefits and stuff like that. Again, really important jobs that people are doing, but they don't get to decide the things in the institution too much. And they don't get any benefits and stuff like that. And then, but there's a long history of Black institutions, and that's also what I want to stress is that sometimes I think we're finding these white institutions that are treating people really violently. It's because they have money. I'm supposed to be able to do my show here, but they're canceling because they don't want me to speak up against their craziness. They don't want me to highlight their racism. But I'm like, wow, why am I doing this in this space? Well, they have this money. There are Black institutions. We have a long history of Black museums. One of the first museums is really the one at Hampton University. Academic museum is really important. And so many Black curators and other curators of color came through that institution. They were trained there. We don't often learn about places like that, though. And we keep so much of the focus is on these certain kind of places, and I've worked in mainly in white institutions, but there are other ones. I think there is this constant erasure of Black institutions, right? Of that kind of training that we've been doing for ourselves. There is often an erasure of that and that valorization of these white museum spaces. And we kind of have to really make a conscious effort to work against that. And more of us need to be writing about these other spaces, documenting those kind of histories and talking them up. I know like that's why I was so excited to talk with Antwoine and work with him, because he is an artist. This is curating his own stuff and making his own museum, and really going through that history. I've learned a lot in the spaces I've been in. I've learned a lot in multiple ways. Had some really good experiences in these spaces, but also that each place has been violent in some way. And I would say that most of those places, they all know that they're doing racist things. It's just what they do. And I do think that's part of it, is to kind of destroy us a little bit on the inside. And it's a control measure. None of this is new. Think back in the 80s, 90s, they were going through some kind of whole diversity thing with these curatorial jobs, made a huge initiative of it. They don't usually focus on the cultures inside and doing any work to address the racism inside. They just act like it's just that we aren't qualified, and that's why we're not in those spaces. Anyway, that's a really long answer. I don't know if it even answered exactly what you wanted.
No, that was so helpful. We have one last question that I think you sort of already answered, that I just wanted to cover briefly, that I think speaks to your trajectory within art history, and certainly a lot of the reasons why I turned to Black Studies as an undergrad, master's student, and PhD, because, there are Black spaces within white spaces that sometimes can be every bit as violent but other times, opportunities to reach, spaces of joy. Taryn Lee asks, did you seek higher education in white educational institutions knowing you would have to constantly be unlearning and defending yourself from the harmful racist history of Western academia? And I would add, what would you tell younger LaTanya about your trajectory? I think that's always a healthy, reflective question that I struggle to answer. Right.
Yeah, that's the one we should all be writing to write an essay to ourselves on what would we tell our younger self. I went this route, and I don't know if it was the best route, but unfortunately, so much of my training early on as a kid too was in spaces where I was just in white spaces. So it was actually natural to me. It was I was used to being ostracized, and I was used to the racism and abuse, and that's not fine or good, but it actually was my experience as a kid. I was often in these honors classes. So even if the school was pretty diverse, the classes that I was in as an honors student, I was one of those people that's a product of tracking what they were doing, deciding at some point that certain kids was on this track and versus this other track. It's a very racist, very contentious kind of project that they've been doing in education. I didn't, I was just a kid. I took these standardized tests and I was placed in these certain kind of classes. And then once you're placed in it, you move along this track, like you continue on. My family didn't have college educations really, and they just wanted me to do well. And, they assumed that, I was doing well in school. It was kind of easy for me. I was doing it, but it also was very violent. Fortunately, my mother did intervene, and my dad, and they would try to help me and things. But I was pretty much a product of kind of an experiment, that happened after the civil rights movement of doing this integration project. I'm a product of that, and it's been a difficult thing, the post civil rights, that certain civil rights, era. There's all kind of stuff to talk about that with like bell hooks and stuff, thinking, with people like who talked about the, yes, we had this integration, but that's not really what we should have been trying to get, or that's not really the thing. You just wanted better schools and opportunities for your children. We didn't want to necessarily go to school with white kids. We ended up in schools with teachers who didn't care about us. I've been used to people not caring about me. And I wish I hadn't been so used to that. That hurts. And now, the good part is I've kind of gotten to the zone where I'm like, I'm just done with putting up with that kind of foolishness and violence. And I refuse to let people hurt me.
Wow. I can't, I resonate so much with that. And indeed, and I'm very grateful for a mother who, I went to a 90% white high school in suburb that waved the Confederate flag proudly. Right. So all my history, English, science teachers were all in many ways complicit with that ideological, symbolic celebration. And in many ways, it was the arts, it was Black studies, it was a kind of recognition of that persistent violence that, is hardening in a way that shouldn't be the case for students, for young people. But I love the way in which your, practice, years later, really speaks to young people who, for the art of Black descent workshops, right? That's a seed and a gift that I'm sure young LaTanya would have liked to be more, invested in or surrounded by. I know I would have benefited from that kind of project too. So it is 5:05. I know you are an exhausted and important Black woman who needs her rest. And I hope that you're able to take some on this day. And we're so grateful for your time, your words, your energy. And, I know at least some grad students who look forward to being in touch in the future. So thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Really, I really appreciate it. And, good luck to everybody out there. Take care.
Peace.
Cheers.